Welcome. Thank you ever so much for joining our Twilight webinar. So the subject of the webinar today is on funding for students, for disabled learners considering higher education. Just a few little bits of housekeeping before we get started. We are recording this session, so it will be available for other people to watch that can't make the session live today, and we'll be able to send out copies after we've recorded it, so it'll be available after on our website. We have got a couple of things in the chat function going on, so if you've got any comments or any questions that you wish to raise during the session, please put them in the chat function and we will answer them likely at the end of the workshop. We've also got a poll in there as well, so we'll just be asking a couple of questions at the start and at the end, so we're really grateful if you could go into the chat and answer the poll, just to get a sense of people's understanding currently of the things that we're going to be talking to you about, and at the end as well. That will be really helpful. So I'll go on to the next step. Fantastic. So we're delivering this session today as a regional partnership. People are still coming in. Just let me let some people in. So we work for an organisation called Hepp, which is the Higher Education Progression Partnership, and we are basically a partnership of local universities and colleges, and we work together to provide impartial information about higher education in all of its different shapes and sizes. We are funded by Sheffield Hallam University and the University of Sheffield. I'll go on to the next one there. I'm not Kelly Self, you may have noticed. That's my colleague. I'm just standing in for Kelly today to help to facilitate this session. The things that we are going to be covering today is an overview of the disabled students' allowances, how to apply, what the process is, your eligibility for applying. We also want to kind of cover the benefits and the support that you may be eligible for when you start in higher education, and we'll cover a little bit at the end about bursaries and scholarships, which is the free money that you may be entitled to as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass on to the first of, I think I haven't introduced anybody. I've started terribly. We've got colleagues from Barnsley College, from the University of Sheffield, from Sheffield Hallam University, and we've got a student as well, a current student that's going to be talking to you as well. So I will let them introduce themselves in turn. So over to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Alex. Hello, good evening. Well, I think it's evening. I'm still not sure. Welcome carers, parents and young people, and I hope you find this really interesting. We'll try to make it as palatable as we can. It's quite difficult to pick your way through the subject, but my name's Jackie Reaney and I'm the Higher Education Disability Advisor at Barnsley College University Centre, and that gets a longer title every time I have to say it. Next slide, please, Kelly. So today we're going to be exploring the DSA, the Disabled Students Allowance, as a crucial source of support for many disabled students in higher education. And I am going to pick that phrase apart because it trips off the tongue, but is a little bit more complex than we initially might think it is. Next slide, please. So what is it? Well, DSA, Disabled Students Allowance, is an academic budget issued by the government to cover disabled students' support costs in university / higher education. It's been around for 30 years, over 30 years. It was set up back in 1991, bit of a history lesson here, sorry folks. And it was at the time when disability discrimination laws came into being. So leaping on the back of all of that disability legislation, we lobbied for there to be something that included education and learners and students who might struggle because of a health issue or a disability. Now, a lot of people wonder why we hang on to that phrase disability, and I think it really is important. When we got to 2010, the Equality Bill, the Equality Bill absorbed the disability legislation, so it gives us the full weight of the law. If we talk about disability legislation and we say disabled students, it reminds you and it reminds us that we're covered by the weight of the law. Universities and higher education institutions have a legal obligation to make reasonable adjustments. So we do cling to that word disability as a reminder. Again, it's delivered by the student finance bodies. There might be Student Finance England for most people. I'm just going to try and switch that poll off from my screen. There it is. Student Finance England, Student Finance Wales, Student Finance Northern Ireland, and the Scottish agency as well. So those agencies who are responsible for delivering your government student loan funding, they're the ones who are the gatekeepers for the DSA. It doesn't come as money. It sounds like an allowance of money, but it isn't. It's a mixture of technical and practical support, which will be built around the learner so that they feel that it gives them the opportunity to study more comfortably, to study more fairly, to study without feeling that a health issue or a disability impacts upon their studies. And that's where we come back to the word disability, because in education, in higher education, disability is bigger than you would think of it in society as a whole. The umbrella for disability at university is any diagnosis of something that will impact upon your studies. So it's bigger than the word disability would sit on its own. So it comes as the ability for us to put together those things that will enable students to work around something that might impact upon their studies. So it's delivered by student finance agencies. It's not money, it's not means tested. So it doesn't matter what your family income is. It's not a benefit. It won't compromise any family benefits that you guys are already receiving. And lastly, it's not a loan. You don't have to pay it back. Whatever you get through this is going to be yours to keep as a student in university or higher education. So if we get you a scanner or a printer or a laptop, that's going to be yours to keep. It's not give backable. So it really is something worth going for. Who can apply? Well, any student who has a diagnosis of something that will impact upon how they study. Doesn't matter whether it's a visible health issue, whether it's a bad back, whether it's autism, whether it's dyslexia. If you know that your learner applicant has a diagnosis of something that's going to compromise or impact upon how they study in certain areas, how they study in the classroom, how comfortable they are, how anxious they are, then those are the people who will need to be looking at applying for this disabled students allowance, because we can use this budget to redress some of those difficulties. So it's there for full-time and part-time students, as long as the applicant is doing at least 25% of a full-time course. It is only for level 4 and above. So if you're on a level 3 course, even if it's called, we've got a few called access to art and access to health, they sound like they should be covered by disabled students allowance, but they're not. They're level 3 and they're access courses. Once you move into the level 4, then you're entitled to explore getting this disabled students allowance. So in other words, any student who would be going on to a government student loan as part of their funding entitlement will be eligible to apply for disabled students allowance. Next one, please. And because it's such a big fund, and obviously there's a lot of money being paid out by the finance agencies, they do need to see evidence around a disability. So it's, you know, it would be nice if we could just say, I need a computer because I'm dyslexic, or I need a chair because I've got a bad back, I need a chair with back support. But we don't get to make those decisions, but we do expect Student Finance England to look at the evidence we present and to see that our applicant is entitled to it. So we have to submit evidence. It's got to be NHS evidence or GP evidence for most health related, including mental health related issues. So in other words, if you have anxiety or depression, we'll need something from your GP that confirms that. And this isn't the university saying you're going to need this. This is Student Finance England, who are not going to open their purse strings without us providing that. So, you know, apologies from us as universities. We have to meet their criteria in order for the student to be able to access it. So they need a clear diagnosis from a specialist or an agency about how it affects concentration, energies, comfort, variable moods. And in some cases, that's quite hard to get evidence. I know that for autism and for ADHD, the journey to getting your evidence can be about 2 years. And thankfully, Student Finance England and the other agencies now accept what they call a working diagnosis. So if your doctor confirms you are currently going down a route of exploring whether you might be autistic, that will be sufficient. That's a working diagnosis towards autism. But again, it needs the GP or NHS to say that. It includes mental health issues, so anxiety. We still need your GP or a consultant or a specialist to confirm that you experience persistent anxiety, or that the student experiences variable mood swings or depression. And I know when we look at your EHCP, a lot of you will have, particularly the parents, will have fought very, very hard through college to get a good educational health and care plan that reflects what the learner needs. And I don't want you to feel that we discount that, but Student Finance don't take it perhaps as seriously as we would have liked them to take it. It doesn't count for as much when you get into the HE side of things. So for an educational health and care plan, we as disability advisors would absorb that information so that we can build our levels of support for the learner to continue to be supported around that. But the document itself isn't acceptable as evidence for anything other than autism. Don't know why, but Student Finance England and the other bodies have decided that they will only accept an EHCP as evidence in the case of autistic diagnoses. So if your EHCP states Lisa has autism and is also dyslexic and has a bad back, then Student Finance England, I'm afraid, will write back to us and say, we accept Lisa's diagnosis of autism, but we need additional evidence from alternative professionals about the bad back and the anxiety or whatever the other disability might be, the dyslexia. Dyslexia has to be evidenced by a full diagnostic report. I know it sounds really picky, but I don't want people to go down a route of providing something that ends up being rejected. So let's check out that we've got the right kind of evidence in the first place to avoid delay. And a full diagnostic report might not be what learners have got. Many come in with SEN reports that are, or access reports about exam provision. And again, Student Finance England will say, no, we need a full report done at secondary school age or above that will state dyslexia or an SPLD like dyspraxia, dysgraphia. We can advise you on getting that done. We all do the same job as advisors in each institution. We'll advise you on how to get that report upgraded to be one that will not be rejected when you get to Student Finance England. Next one, please. So your DSA provides you with equipment, which might be scanner, it might be software, it might be software that records the lectures and translates them into note-taking on screen. That's called Glean software. It might be software where you dictate instead of typing and the program writes it out. There are a lot of gadgetry stuff around that you won't be aware of, and don't let that put you off, because you will be shown and introduced to a whole range of software that will make life fairer and more comfortable for the learner in HE. There might be a workstation. If you've got a bad back, you'll need a footrest. You might need a chair with good back support. You might even need a desk that moves up and down. You might need a differently styled keyboard. All of those, they're all bought through DSA. And again, they're all going to be yours to keep at the end of it. What it will do is it will mean that you have the furniture that accommodates how you work best in your study bedroom. And that might be your study bedroom at home, if you're living at home as you study, or it might be your accommodation bedroom in Manchester or in Sheffield or in Leeds. It will be where you are, but it's not exclusively, it's not in the university, it's where you work at your assignments when you're in your study time. As well as the stuff, the techie stuff, there will be one-to-one access to one-to-one study skills coaching or mentor support or BSR. So a person to support you, and that person will be paid for through this budget again. And there'll be an agreement of how often you meet, and usually nowadays it tends to be through virtual meetings, so it will be done on camera call, so you'll have that meeting going through your assignment and assistance with putting that assignment together if you're dyslexic, and assistance perhaps with managing your anxieties if you've got mental health issues, and that can be done virtually. And in some cases it is face-to-face if that's the best way you work. The idea is always support is tailored to how you best work, how the learner gets the best information out, the best opportunity to excel on the course. There's also reimbursement of disability related costs. So for example, if you've been provided with a printer and a scanner, then you'll get the cost of paper and the cost of printer cartridges paid for, reimbursed into your bank account, because that would only be fair. It shouldn't cost you anymore. And finally, the one that people most often forget about would be there is an opportunity to claim back or to have provided for the learner taxi travel to attend. Now, I know that many students with high anxiety levels or many autistic students struggle with public transport. Don't let that be a determining factor when you're exploring universities. Don't look at the university you're exploring and think, oh, the accommodation is too far away from the campus. It means too many bus routes. Because if you're someone who cannot, because of your health issue or disability, if you're someone who cannot navigate your way through public transport, you're provided with a taxi between where you stay, where you live, and between the university campus. So don't let that be a determining factor. You might get funding for a taxi. Next one, please. So who decides on this? Well, it would be nice if we could just run through a checklist and say, oh, do you want that? Let's have that. It would be nice to do that. But actually, Student Finance England hold the purse strings. So once they've accepted your evidence, they'll send you out permission to attend or to take part in an assessment at an assessment centre. The one used in the northern part of the country is called Study Tech, and the one used in the southern part of the country is called Capita. You can't have the assessment until Student Finance are happy that your evidence is accountable and and matches what you might need in terms of interacting with the course. And then they'll say attend an assessment, and that again can be a camera call to Study Tech, and the assessor there will talk to you about what you've used before, what sort of keyboard have you had, do you think you'd manage with this software, do you think you'd prefer to work like this? And that way you feed into the assessment process, exactly how you feel you'd work more comfortably with. I just had a call today from a student who's received everything for the current year and who hadn't realised what a massive workload it would be off his mind. And that, you know, it's lovely when somebody's light bulb moment is looking at the equipment they've got and for the first time using it. So equipment's demonstrated through the camera call. A report is put together in collaboration with the learner applicant, and then it's sent to SFE for approval. It doesn't matter which university you're going to end up at. So if you start applying for it now and you're in Barnsley, and if you're going to end up in Sheffield, it will just switch direction with you. We start with you. The entitlement of equipment and support sits on a cloud and waits till you're going to arrive at Sheffield or Leeds or Manchester, and then it's delivered to you. So it doesn't matter that you don't maybe know for definite where your host university is going to be. So finally, when should you apply? Now. The forms come out in 2 to 3 weeks' time. It is a long process. It's a 3-month process. Student Finance England have asked us to say 3 months now, not 2. And with no control over that process other than first come, first served, and let's get your evidence sorted so that it's not rejected. As soon as the application forms come out, start that application process and get it underway. If you leave it until son, daughter, learner gets to university and they start then, sometimes it's Christmas before they've received their budget and before they've received their equipment. And that is simply because of the numbers being handled. Start now, the minute the paperwork comes out over the next 2 or 3 weeks. The new forms will be out now, February, March. Well, it's the end of February this week. They're not out yet. Then on the cusp of being out. But what you can be doing is making sure you've got the right evidence to do the job. It's a bit like when you hand a passport application in at the post office. You don't want it to be rejected. You want everything to be approved quickly. So check out with somebody, will this be acceptable as my evidence? Check out with a disability advisor from any of the universities. Will this be acceptable? Let's not have it delayed by being rejected. So I hope that overview has been informative and has kind of explored a few of the myths and made it seem a little less complex than you first thought. I'm going to pass you over to Sarah, my colleague from Sheffield Hallam, and she's going to dig into the actual paperwork with you. All right, thank you for listening.
Hello, my name's Sarah Lamb and I'm a disability advisor at Sheffield Hallam University, and I've worked in student support for a long time, and used to be a needs assessor as well. So I know this both from the disability advisor side of things and also from the needs assessor point of view. Next slide, please. So like Jackie said, apply when you at the same time as you apply for student finance, and that would be via the Student Finance England portal. And we're going to have a look at some of the screens that will come up through that portal. So when you apply online, like Jackie said, the processing time is quite lengthy. It can take between 3 or 4 months. I always have in my head, think Easter, and at Easter, that's when the DSA applications normally come out. I think usually the Student Finance England applications come out slightly before. So I would definitely have a look at that. So on this slide, this is what it looks like online. And it explains a little bit about who can apply. Like Jackie says, anyone that has a disability or a medical condition that impacts on your ability to study, and that condition just needs to have lasted 12 months or will last at least 12 months. So that can include things like long COVID or a cancer diagnosis. So in terms of the computer equipment, Student Finance England expect all students to have access to their own laptop. Now, what this means is that a laptop can be provided through disabled students allowance, but you may have to make a contribution of £200 towards the cost of that computer. So that's just something to bear in mind, and that's because they expect all students to have one. So yeah, so this is the screen, and you'll get asked for a question: do you want to apply for disabled students allowance? If you say no at this point, you can go back later on, but if you know you've got a disability and you want to access the support, it's definitely worth doing. Next slide, please. So this is an example of a student's account, and you can look at, it'll show you at the top which course you're applying for, funding for. Now, if you're not sure, if you're not sure which course you're going to be at, depending on what your insurance and your your firm offer is, still apply. Don't wait until you get your results. That can always be tweaked later on in the process. It's far better to have the needs assessment and get the support in place, and then it be tweaked for your course at a later date, because it's such a time-consuming process. What kind of type of disability do you have? So the definition of disability for disabled students allowance sits within the Equality Act, which was brought in 2010. So like I mentioned, it's got to be a disability that's going to last longer than 12 months, or already has lasted longer than 12 months, and that will include mental health difficulties. So some people might have a long-term mental health condition, or it might be that they just have an episode of depression or an episode of anxiety, and they may not be eligible, but if it's likely to last 12 months or longer, it's worth applying. Next slide, please. So this is like a tick box of how to, gives you a little bit of a definition of the different disabilities, and you can choose that, and then it will take you through onto the next page, which will give you information on consents to share. Next slide, please. Now, this is a really key page, particularly for the disability advisors on us, and for us to be able to support you with the process. So they will ask you to give consent to share to your needs assessor. Now, the needs assessor is the person who makes the recommendations for the additional support through disabled students allowance. And I just want to highlight here that this process is not like the PIP or the DLA process. The assessor is not establishing eligibility. By the time you get to your needs assessment, that you already have eligibility. It's just working about creating an individual plan for you about what's suitable and what support you need. Please do give consent to your needs assessor and also to your disability advisor. I think in the second box here we've got this as not agreed. That can make it really difficult, because if I wanted to support you in checking your DSA application, I ring Student Finance England and they won't share information with me, which can make it a bit of a challenge in terms of how we pick up those things if you've got any issues, or you just need a bit of support and working out what stage you are in the process. Next slide, please. Now, there is a final section here that asks you if you want to give more details. You don't need to. This information doesn't get shared with the university and doesn't get shared with your needs assessor. The key bits of information that the university will use is information that you share with them, and your needs assessor will be basing the assessment off the medical evidence or the diagnostic report that you've shared with Student Finance England. So they'll use that to support your application. Next slide, please. So once you've done the online application, you can then send in medical evidence. Now, for some students, they may have a prescription and might be in support through their GP for mental health difficulties, and then there's a form that can be filled in. It's a really short form, it's just 2 pages that your GP can fill in, that gives information about the impact of the disability and also details of the person giving the evidence. That's available on SFE's web pages, and usually GPs will complete this without a cost. It's not always the case, but I think Alison mentioned in the chat that sometimes there is support at universities to get help funding with that through the hardship funds. You need to check per individual institution because it's not the same at all institutions, and also check depending on when you're starting your course because it may differ depending on what the support arrangements are at the university. So what happens after this? Once you've applied, Student Finance England will consider the evidence and consider your application. If there's any, if they've got any questions, they'll get back to you. If they're happy with the evidence that you've submitted, you'll receive a letter. Now that letter will come via email and it will tell you that you're eligible for a study needs assessment. And then depending on where you live, you'll be allocated with a supplier. There's 2 suppliers, but they have bases at different places throughout the country. And you can choose whether you want to have that appointment remotely, so like online, whether you want to have it over the phone or whether you want to have it face to face. Go with what suits you best. Some people will find it a lot easier to communicate if they're online. Some people find it a lot easier to communicate if you're face to face. During the assessment, they'll show you software and they might even demonstrate equipment. So it might be useful for some disabilities to have that face to face. And you'll need to provide evidence of your disability to your supplier and the funding body. Also, just to mention that when you get the letter, the assessment centre, either Capita or Study Tech, will also get information about you, so they will make contact with you to book that appointment. But again, specify if you want it face to face or you want it in person. It's definitely your appointment, so please do specify. And that supplier will be your only point of contact, apart from for what we call non-medical helpers allowance, which is a terrible phrase, but that covers things like study skills support and mentoring support and BSL interpreters. That will be done separately. So this is a bit of a diagram. It's quite a useful diagram once you've got the slides afterwards. It's quite busy and shows you lots of information. But what it shows you on there is the different stages of the application process. So you can see that it is quite a complicated path to travel. And what really we want to flag up is that at any point in this process, if you're not sure what's happening, go back to your disability advisor at the university. We can support you through the process. We know this process really well, and we know that students sometimes get a bit confused about what stage they're at and what they're required to provide. Don't let that stop you from having any problems that you have. Don't let it stop you from getting in touch, so we can help you unpick that if you get stuck. So you'll apply as you apply for your student funding, and then you will Student Finance England will look at your assessment and work out if you're eligible, and then you'll be provided with a needs assessment, and then the journey will continue to get equipment. I can't stress enough, apply early. It can take, like I said earlier, 3 to 4 months. So if you can't, if you're wanting support in place for the start of term, it's really worth applying as soon as possible. Don't worry if you can't, if you don't apply, it's still worth applying, and you can apply all the way through your course. Some students have disabilities diagnosed as they go through. It might be that coming to university they find out that they have dyslexia, or they might develop a mental health condition or a medical condition that they need support with. So yeah, just reach out and ask if you're not unsure about whether support is available. So I think that's it for me. Yes, I'll pass you over to Alison from the University of Sheffield. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So I'll try and move away from answering the questions now to talking about my slides. So I'm the Disability Transition Officer, and I'm based in the Disability and Dyslexia Support Service at the university. So I was a disability advisor for a long time, and then I've been a Disability Transition Officer for an equally long time. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've talked obviously quite a lot today about DSA, but my main message is to share that basically at university there are two ways of ensuring that students have full access to all of the support that's available. So in essence, there are two routes to setting up support. Some of the support can only be provided through DSA if a student is eligible to apply for DSA. And some of the other support will be put in place by the disability service within the higher education institution. So in terms of what the disability service within university will put in place, that very much, like DSA, depends on a student's individual support needs. It might also, to some extent, depend on the course they're on, and it will definitely depend on the support that's available within that specific institution. There are some differences across universities in terms of the type of support that's available. There are lots of similarities. And like Jackie said at the beginning, you know, in terms of advisors, we're all there to do the same job, and that's to try and ensure that students have full access to the course. But there might still be some differences in terms of the type of support that's available. Next slide, please. So in terms of setting up higher education support, so setting up support through the disability service. So it's quite likely that within the university, there will be a disability advisor, or there might be called something slightly different to that, but there will be somebody that is there and they are responsible for discussing a student's support needs with them or an applicant's support needs with them and identifying appropriate support that can be put in place by the disability service. So support isn't put in place automatically, so it's really important that either at the applicant stage, ideally at the applicant stage, or at the stage of a student arriving at university, they get in contact with the disability service so that they can have a discussion with the advisor to determine what support can be put in place through the service. The disability service might need to set up some of the DSA support for a student. Now, this is quite specific, really. So if a university has their own mentor team, for example, so specialist mentoring is a type of support that, for example, an autistic student, a student with ADHD, a student with a mental health condition might be recommended. If the university has their own mental health mentor team, then it's possible that if the DSA has approved that mentor support is provided by that university, then the disability advisor will then need to make a referral for that mentor support. But not all universities have their own mentor teams. A lot of the support now, where support is provided by people through DSA, so mentoring, study skills, tuition, for example, that's often provided now by an external company. But it's worth just obviously, so once the eligibility letter comes through, it will make it clear in terms of who the provider is. And if it is the university, then get in contact with the disability service. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of the types of support that might be organised and put in place by a university, so lots of universities now provide transition support. So there might be various transition events taking place over the summer or in the first few weeks of uni. Some universities might be able to put in place one-to-one orientation support for students. So, for example, autistic students that need some support to familiarise themselves with the environment from kind of travelling around campus, for example. So have some contact with the disability service and find out what transition support is available for applicants. So we've talked about obviously the need for evidence, and I think Jackie already mentioned that some students, so if a student needs an updated SPLD diagnostic assessment, for example, then the university might have a referral route for that. So some universities can refer students to an educational psychologist so that they can have an updated SPLD assessment. So that's for students who come to us who might have had screening or might have had some kind of provide evidence for access arrangements, but not a full diagnostic report. So we might be able to refer a student to meet with an educational psychologist. Some universities might also be able to fund that. But again, it varies depending on the institution, so have some contact. Some universities, I understand, can also refer for autism diagnostic assessments. We used to, for example, at Sheffield University, but we don't do that anymore. But what we have now is a really clear system in terms of being able to support students to access evidence of a working diagnosis or probable diagnosis of autism and ADHD as well, like Jackie said. Exam support. So that has nothing to do with DSA. So the DSA needs assessor shouldn't really be making recommendations around exam adjustments. So that would need to be discussed with the university's disability service, and it's the disability advisor that would make the recommendations for exam support. In terms of what that might be, obviously that depends upon the individual. Some examples might be 25% extra time, rest periods, use of a PC, for example. We'll take into consideration what our students accessed previously, but we'll also think about what we can put in place at the university. And it's obviously we need to take into consideration evidence that students provide, but it's very much about the discussion that we have with students in terms of what the exam situation needs to look like for students. There will be a way that the disability service can share support information with the academic department, which is really important because that's the way that we can confirm with departments that a student is eligible for individual support. And it also enables the disability service to make some recommendations in terms of what that support should look like. We do that with input from the student and consent from the student as well. So they've got control over that process. Lecture recordings. So that, I mean, really now that's an example of inclusive practice. So something that most students are able to access at university if the university does record the lectures. So lots of universities now record their lectures as standard, and then those lecture recordings are available for students to access. So obviously that supports students with note taking, for example, if a student might lose their focus in lectures and they know they've got that to access. Access to computer equipment and software. Ideally, that would come through DSA, but lots of universities do have software available within their libraries, for example, as well, that students can access. And then in terms of support worker assistance, so some of that would be funded through DSA, so the mentoring, study skills tuition, for example, but not all of it. So there were some types of note takers, there were some types of support worker assistance where if there's a disability related reason for the student to have that support in place, that would need to be provided by the university if that support is available. So that's things like note takers, orientation support, library support, exam support workers, for example. So yeah, the message, as well as obviously applying for DSA, is also to have contact with the disability service to set up support. I think that's it from me. Yeah. Okay, Stacey. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Stacey and I'm a disability champion and I go to the University of Sheffield, and I'm just going to talk a bit about my experience of DSA and getting DSA and that process. So I applied around April before I started my course, and as these guys have mentioned, it can take a long time. So the admin and all that was getting sorted, and I was invited for a needs assessment around about the summertime. So that was after the university had agreed that, yeah, I was going to go to their university and they've got all their evidence, because for me, I already had a letter from a psychologist saying I'm autistic, and it had all my barriers I had on there, so it was quite easy to just put that onto my form and send them. So all I had to do then was go for a needs assessment, and it can be a bit frightening if you think about what is a needs assessment, what they're going to talk about, but it was just talking about barriers to learning that I may have, or things that I've used previously, and they just chatted through different ways of learning with me and suggested things that might make it easier. Because I had my own laptop, I didn't need to worry about that. They just offered insurance for me, which was quite nice to know that I'm not going to lose any of my work and my assistive software will always be there for me. And so note-taking apps are really useful for me, and they went through having mind maps and stuff for learning would be really helpful. And because I'd never had that support before, I just said, yeah, I'll try everything. And the stuff I've tried been really good. So having Grammarly and Glean has been really useful. And then physically having a printer was really useful for me, because I didn't realize how much I appreciated having stuff printed out and being able to write on it. And that's really helped with my learning. So I definitely just, my tips for DSA would be saying, definitely be honest with a needs assessment, because it can be a bit scary, but being honest with them, chatting about what you do struggle with, or like what you might need help with, is always good, even if you don't realize it. And because I've not had that support before, they use their knowledge of what other students with my disability have had, and I just tried that out and it worked for me. So yeah, it's been really, really good getting DSA, and I'm glad that I did, even though it's a very long process. It can be quite difficult. And also the admin related, that staying on top is quite good. And the disability advisors at universities are really helpful with that as well, and really made the process a lot easier.
Fantastic. Kelly, can you go on to the next slide for me? Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk really briefly about some of the other bits and bobs. And I know that there's some questions coming up in the chat as well, but I think everyone's answering them as they go along, which is fantastic. So bursaries and scholarships. In a nutshell, bursaries and scholarships it's free money. So unlike student loans that you need to repay, it's free money if you're eligible. Bursary usually awarded to students based on their personal circumstances. Scholarships tend to be more linked to achievement or excellence in academics, sports or music. And the bursaries and scholarships are from the institution specifically. So whereas you think about the DSA or student support in terms of loans, that's the same wherever you go, if you like, whereas the bursaries and scholarships will be specific to the institution that you go to. So if you've got an institution in mind, it's well worth getting in touch with them to look at what specific bursaries and scholarships they offer that you may be eligible for. Thanks, Kelly. So just a couple of examples of you there on screen. So Goldsmith, University of London offer bursaries for students who have a recognised disability that has been disclosed on their UCAS application form, and the value of that bursary is between, it's not between anything, it's £3,000 for this coming academic year. Sheffield Hallam University, they offer a student success scholarship for priority groups of students with a disability, and you can receive financial awards of anywhere between £600 and just over £2,000. The Snowdon Trust, the trust breaks down barriers for disabled students to achieve their education and employability goals, and you can apply to them directly for grants of up to £5,000 to cover any disability related costs. And the links for those particular bursaries and scholarships will be in the presentation that we send through after the event. Thanks, Kelly. Both of our university partners, so Sheffield Hallam University and the University of Sheffield, have got specific schemes to support students from the application stage onwards. So I think I'll talk about those one at a time. So for any students who are applying to Sheffield Hallam University, then the programme of support that is available is called SHU Progress. So SHU Progress provides support for applicants whose personal circumstances might mean that there are additional barriers to going to university. So in terms, if you look a bit in the middle, isn't it, the groups that we can support, you'll see a big long list of student groups that fall into that category, and disabled students are in there. So if you are a disabled learner, then you are able to apply to SHU Progress. And the kind of thing, I won't list them all out, but the kind of thing that that support can assist with is things like, for example, having a named contact within the university, being able to be referred to specialist teams across the university, exclusive events at the university, and some financial support as well. So as I say, what you'll find is if you've got the university in mind, and if one of those is Sheffield Hallam University, you can go onto their website, or you can email them or contact that named point of contact, and they will be able to talk you through the process for applying to that scheme, and all the additional help that they can provide you through that journey. Thanks, Kelly. So for the University of Sheffield, they offer similar support. It's called something else, but essentially the aim is the same: is to provide you with that transitional support to make sure that you've got everything you need. So again, just to read from their slides, recognising that starting university can feel exciting, but also quite challenging, and that the team is there to help to support disabled applicants to make that transition to the University of Sheffield. And all the information in terms of what support's on offer, how you can apply for that support, is available on their website below. Thanks, Kelly. And then a quick plug from Hepp is we've got our own website called the Hepp Hub, which is at hepp.ac.uk. We've got a bunch of different resources on there, including some videos and some booklets that you can access, full of advice. We've got some dedicated pages on there to support underrepresented groups, one of them being disabled learners. And I know that my colleague Kelly she'd get really angry with me if I didn't plug the newsletter as well. So there's a newsletter available for parent and carers, where if you put your phone up against that QR code, you'll be able to follow a link where you can register for the newsletter, where we can send you lots more stuff. Wrap it up just by saying a huge thank you to Jackie, Alison, Sarah, Stacey, attending our session today. We really appreciate it.